It was just another ordinary morning in the large, quiet house. The sun had barely risen, and the soft golden light spilled into the rooms, reflecting off the polished floors. Outside, the garden birds sang their morning songs, and the air smelled fresh with the dew of the early hours. Inside, the house was still and calm, the kind of calm that felt almost like it could last forever. The maid moved through the house as she always did. Her steps were quiet but purposeful, almost like a part of the house itself. She had been working there for many years, and in that time she had learned every corner, every detail, and every little quirk of the place. She knew exactly which vase had to be dusted first, which curtains needed adjusting, and how to keep the floors shiny without leaving streaks. To most people, these were small, invisible acts. To her, they were a part of life, a rhythm she had come to understand and rely on. She had a simple life, and she liked it that way. It was not full of luxury or excitement, but it was honest and steady. She woke up early, made a small breakfast, cleaned the house, and sometimes ran errands for the people who lived there. Her world was small, predictable, and safe. Yet, even in this routine, there was a quiet sense of pride in what she did. The house looked perfect because of her work. Even if no one noticed it most days, that morning she moved through the house with her usual diligence. The floors gleamed under her careful touch. The furniture shone like it had just been polished, and the scent of fresh cleaning mixed with the faint aroma of flowers from the garden outside. Everything was as it should be, and she felt a familiar satisfaction in seeing the house in order outside her small quarters. The other staff were busy with their own tasks. Some were in the kitchen preparing breakfast, others were setting tables or organizing supplies. Everyone moved in harmony, a silent understanding that each one had their role to play. It was a house where order mattered, where every day followed a routine, and where surprises were rare. She worked, she noticed small things that most people might not even think about. A tiny speck of dust on the edge of a table, a curtain slightly uneven, a vase that needed to be straightened. She corrected each one with care. Her eyes were sharp, trained by years of experience. She didn't need anyone to tell her what to do. She already knew, even though the house was large and the people who lived there were wealthy. The maid had never seen the owner. She had only heard stories from the other staff, brief mentions of a man who rarely visited, who lived far away, and who was too busy to notice the daily details of the house. To her, he was a distant figure, almost like a shadow in the background of her life. She had never imagined that she would ever meet him, let alone have an encounter that would change everything. She went about her morning with quiet contentment. There was a rhythm to her work, almost like a dance. Every step, every movement was purposeful. She dusted, polished, swept, and arranged, all with an unspoken sense of responsibility. The house was her stage, and she played her part flawlessly. As she moved through the living room, she paused for a moment to straighten a small stack of magazines. Her hands were steady, her mind focused. She noticed a slight unevenness in the sunlight falling across the floor and adjusted a small rug to correct it. She did this not for anyone to see, not for praise or acknowledgement, but simply because it felt right. It was in these small, unnoticed moments that her character shone the brightest. She paused for a short break, sitting quietly in the corner of the room. She sipped a cup of tea she had prepared for herself and looked around at the house she had kept in perfect order. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her efforts made the home beautiful, even if no one ever said thank you. It was a small, personal pride, one that filled her heart in a way that words never could. Her thoughts wandered as she drank her tea. She thought about her life, her family, and the simple pleasures she enjoyed. She thought about the people she had met, the friends she had made, and the lessons she had learned through her years of work. She thought about honesty, integrity, and the quiet strength it took to live a life that was good and honorable. Even when no one was watching, the house remained calm and still around her. The morning continued as it always did, with a gentle quiet that could almost be felt in the air. The staff moved about their tasks, and the world outside continued on its normal course. Everything seemed ordinary, predictable, and safe. Yet beneath this calm there was a tension building, a change that no one could have anticipated. She finished her tea and returned to her work. unaware that the day was about to take a turn that would disrupt the normal rhythm of the house. Something was coming, something unexpected that would challenge her, reveal her character, and bring her into a moment she had never imagined. The clock ticked quietly on the wall, marking the passage of time. The sunlight shifted slightly, casting new shadows across the floors and walls. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, without warning, the ordinary day that had started like any other was about to become extraordinary. The maid continued her work, humming softly to herself. She arranged the cushions on the sofa, straightened the curtains, and wiped the surfaces with careful precision. Every movement was precise yet gentle, showing a grace that only came from years of dedication. She moved as though the house itself depended on her, and in a way it did. Outside, the sounds of the world went on. Birds sang, the wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a car passed by. Yet inside, the house remained quiet, serene, and unchanged. The calm before the storm, though she did not know it yet, was settling in like a soft blanket over everything she had worked so hard to maintain. She paused once more, looking around at the rooms she had cleaned and organized. Everything was perfect, just as it should be. The air smelled faintly of polish and flowers, and the sunlight created a warm glow across the furniture. She smiled to herself, proud of the care she had taken. It was a small, simple joy, but it was hers alone, and that made it meaningful. Little did she know this quiet, ordinary morning would soon be interrupted. A visitor was about to enter the house, someone whose presence would shift everything. The calm, predictable life of the household, and her place within it, was about to face a challenge. But she had no way of knowing that yet. For now, she continued her work, moving from room to room with the grace and diligence that had become her signature. Every brush, every sweep, every careful adjustment was a part of her story. A story that was about to intersect with another, far larger one. The ordinary morning was slipping away, carrying with it the peace and routine she had taken for granted. Soon the house would no longer be just a quiet, predictable place. Soon, the maid's life, as simple and routine as it had been, would face a moment that would test her character, reveal her true self, and set the stage for a story that would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it. And so, in the stillness of the house, with the sunlight streaming gently through the windows, the ordinary morning continued. The maid worked quietly, unknowingly preparing herself for an event that would change everything. The calm, predictable rhythm of her life was about to meet the extraordinary, and her actions in that moment would shock everyone in ways she could never have imagined. The quiet morning was suddenly broken by an unexpected sound. A soft click of shoes on the polished floor echoed through the house. It was unusual. Footsteps like these rarely belonged to anyone in the staff. The maid paused for a moment, her hand frozen mid-motion as she adjusted a cushion. She frowned slightly, listening. The sound was deliberate, calm, and confident. Unlike the hurried steps of the kitchen staff or the children who sometimes visited the house, she hesitated, unsure who it could be. Visitors were rare, and she had not been informed of anyone arriving that day. The house was usually empty in the mornings, except for the staff going about their duties. She slowly moved toward the source of the sound, curiosity mixing with caution. Her eyes scanned the doorway, the hall, and the living room. Everything appeared normal, and yet there was something in the air that felt different. Then she saw him. A man, dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, was standing at the far end of the hall. His appearance was striking but not flashy, and there was a calm authority in the way he carried himself. His eyes moved slowly across the room, observing quietly, taking in every detail. He did not announce himself, did not speak, and yet his presence filled the space. The staff nearby froze, unsure of what to do. Some whispered softly to each other, exchanging nervous glances. Others stepped back, giving him space. The maid felt a mixture of surprise and curiosity. There was nothing threatening about the man, but there was something commanding in his quiet manner. She had never seen him before, and yet there was a sense that he belonged here in some way. She straightened herself, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached carefully. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice calm but polite. She did not know who he was, but she had learned long ago that respect and courtesy were never wasted. The man's eyes met hers for a brief moment. There was no smile, no frown, just a quiet acknowledgement. He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and then continued to look around. The maid noticed the way he observed everything, the polished floors, the furniture, the arrangement of objects, even the small details like the way the light hit the walls. It was as if he was noticing the house for the very first time, and yet he moved with a kind of certainty, as though he had seen it many times before. The staff whispered nervously among themselves. "Who is he?" one asked. "Is he a guest?" Another replied, voice trembling slightly. They all looked toward the maid, unsure of what she would do. She stood still, her hands folded in front of her, waiting to see what the man would do next. Unlike the others, the maid did not hesitate. She had a sense of calm that came from years of experience, of handling unexpected situations without panic. She stepped forward slightly, maintaining a respectful distance, and asked, "Can I help you with something?" The man's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer. There was no immediate answer, only silence. The tension in the room seemed to grow, thickening with every passing second. The staff shifted nervously, but the maid remained steady, her posture relaxed but alert. She did not know why, but she felt that this man's presence was important. Something about the way he moved, the way he looked, suggested that he was not here by accident. Finally, the man spoke, his voice calm and measured. "I am looking for someone who knows this house well, someone who cares for it," he said. His words were simple, but they carried weight. The staff exchanged glances again, whispering in confusion. But the maid understood. She had dedicated years of her life to this house, ensuring that every detail was perfect, even when no one noticed. She knew she was the person he was looking for, even though she did not know his identity yet. "I can help," she said quietly, with a sense of quiet confidence. Her voice did not waver. She had never met this man before, yet there was something about his presence that inspired trust. She stepped a little closer, making herself available, but never imposing. The man nodded again, as if confirming something to himself. He walked slowly, observing the rooms with care, and the maid followed at a respectful distance. He paused occasionally, his eyes lingering on small details, the angle of a picture frame, the neatness of a stack of papers, the shine on the polished floors. It was clear that he noticed things that most people would overlook. But unlike the other staff, who were anxious and whispering, the maid moved calmly, responding when necessary, and adjusting minor details only when he seemed to notice. "What a beautiful house," he said finally, his voice soft but carrying a quiet appreciation. "Everything is so precise. It feels cared for." The staff glanced at each other nervously. They were waiting for someone to take credit, to speak up, but the maid said nothing. She simply continued her work, letting the house speak for itself. She understood that true care was shown in actions, not words. As they moved through the living room and into the kitchen, the man observed how everything was arranged, how clean and orderly everything was. The staff became increasingly uneasy. They whispered questions to each other. Who is he? Why is he here? Their uncertainty grew, but the maid remained composed. She knew that her duty was to act with integrity. No matter what. The man stopped in the middle of the hallway and turned to look at her. "I can see that you take great care here," he said. "It is rare to see someone who does their work so quietly yet so thoroughly." His tone was calm, but it carried a depth of sincerity. It was clear that he had been observing her from the moment he entered, and that he had noticed the way she moved, the way she treated the house with respect. The maid felt a mixture of surprise and modesty. She had never been praised like this before. Most people did not notice her work, and many took it for granted. But there was no flattery in his words, only a recognition of something real, something honest. The other staff watched in disbelief. They had been focused on the mystery of the man's identity, but now they were witnessing something else entirely. The maid's calm, steady presence in the face of uncertainty. Her respectful yet confident manner seemed to have an effect on him. He walked slowly, continuing to observe the rooms, and she followed at a careful distance. She answered his questions politely, showed him what he needed to see, and never let her curiosity or nervousness interfere with her work. There was a quiet strength in her actions, a sense that she was comfortable in her own skin and confident in her integrity. The staff began to realize something important. While they had been worried about impressing him, trying to guess who he was, the maid had treated him like any other person. She had not been afraid, she had not flattered, and she had not pretended to be someone she was not. She had simply been herself. And it was that authenticity, that honesty, that seemed to have captured his attention. The man finally paused and looked around the kitchen. "You have a rare quality," he said quietly. "You do not act out of fear or expectation. You act out of care and respect." The maid looked at him, unsure how to respond. She had spent her life doing her best without expecting recognition. And yet, here was someone acknowledging it in a way that felt sincere and meaningful. She simply nodded, letting her actions speak more than words could. For the first time, a sense of calm settled over the staff as well. They began to understand that the maid's behavior was different from theirs. She had not been nervous, she had not been anxious, and she had not been trying to guess the man's identity. She had acted naturally with kindness and respect, and it had made a powerful impression. The man continued to move through the house, observing quietly, and the maid continued to assist where needed. Her actions were small but deliberate, adjusting a chair, straightening a cushion, answering a question politely. She did not try to draw attention to herself, but her integrity was clear for anyone to see. Time seemed to stretch in those moments. The house, which had felt ordinary and predictable in the morning, now felt charged with a quiet tension. There was an expectation, a sense that something important was about to happen. And yet the maid remained composed, moving with calm confidence, aware of her surroundings but not overwhelmed by them. Finally, the man stopped and turned to her again. "You have shown me something important," he said softly. "Not many people understand what it means to care, to act with integrity, and to remain true to themselves. You have done that without even realizing it." The maid felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet sense of pride. She had spent her life working honestly, quietly, without expectation. And now, in this unexpected moment, her efforts were being seen and acknowledged. The other staff looked on in silence, realizing that the maid's actions were far more meaningful than their own nervous attempts to impress. They had been focused on appearances, on guessing the man's identity, and trying to act in ways that they thought were correct. The maid had simply been herself, and it had made a lasting impression. The house, once ordinary and predictable, now felt like a stage for something important. The maid's calm, respectful actions had created a moment that would be remembered, a moment that would set the stage for what was to come. And though she did not yet know it, her behavior that morning would soon change everything for her and shock everyone around her in ways they never expected. The house had become strangely quiet after the man's unexpected arrival. The other staff moved cautiously, whispering nervously among themselves. Their curiosity was mixed with fear. They had never seen a stranger enter the house this way, and even less so someone who seemed to notice everything without saying much. But the maid remained calm. She moved carefully, her steps measured and steady, her mind focused. She had been in similar situations before, though none quite like this. She had learned that staying calm, kind, and practical could turn any moment into something manageable. She approached him again, noticing the way he observed the details of the house. The way his eyes lingered on the polished floors, the neatly arranged furniture, the small trinkets placed with care. He didn't rush, didn't demand anything. He simply watched, quietly taking in the work that had been done by her hands over the years. It was as if he were trying to understand the life behind the house, the effort it took to maintain its perfection. "Can I help you with anything?" she asked softly, her voice polite but confident. She did not bow, did not try to flatter him, and she did not hesitate. This was her way of showing respect simply by being genuine, ready to assist without pretension. The man's eyes met hers again, and this time there was a faint hint of a smile, almost imperceptible. "Yes," he said quietly. "I want to see how this house is cared for. I want to know that someone truly takes pride in their work." The staff exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered, "Who is he? How does he know about the house? Is he the owner?" The maid didn't need to know who he was. She understood what mattered most in that moment: honesty, respect, and dedication. She had always believed that how a person behaved when no one was watching revealed their true character. And now, it seemed, she had a chance to prove that belief. She began to show him around the house, leading him from room to room. In each space she performed small gestures of care, straightening cushions, adjusting curtains, polishing surfaces that caught the light just right. She did this naturally, not because he was there, not because she sought praise, but because it was the right thing to do. She treated the house as if it were a living being, deserving of respect and attention. As they moved into the living room, he paused, studying a corner of the room that caught the morning sunlight. "It's beautiful here," he said, almost to himself, "but it feels alive. There's care in every detail." The maid nodded silently. There was no need to explain. The man's words reflected what she had always believed, that care and effort could be felt even when not spoken about. The house was not just a building, it was a reflection of the people who nurtured it. And she had nurtured it every single day. The other staff, however, were growing restless. They began muttering under their breath, unsure of how to act. Some even considered speaking up, offering explanations for why certain things were done a particular way. But the maid did not join them. She understood that true recognition did not come from trying to explain oneself. It came from actions, consistency, and integrity. The man observed her quietly as they walked down the hallway. There was a calmness about her that contrasted sharply with the nervous energy of the others. She moved naturally, with confidence in her knowledge and her abilities. She did not rush, did not falter, and did not pretend. Every gesture was honest, purposeful, and grounded in years of experience. At one point, he asked a simple question: "Why do you do this work so diligently?" The maid paused, considering how to answer. She could have said it was her job, that she had to maintain the house, that she earned her living this way. But instead, she spoke from the heart. "Because it matters," she said simply. "Even when no one notices, it still matters. Everything we do leaves a mark, even if it is small. And when we do it with care, it reflects who we are." The man's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer. It was as if he were measuring her words, weighing them, understanding their meaning. He nodded slowly, a quiet approval in his expression. It was not the approval of someone giving praise, but the recognition of truth. The staff watched in astonishment. Realizing that her words and actions were having a profound effect, they continued through the house. And at each step, the maid's choices revealed her character. When the man reached a cluttered shelf, she did not panic. She did not try to hide the imperfections. Instead, she organized the space with calm efficiency, making it neat and presentable without overdoing it. When he noticed a faint smudge on a table, she did not make excuses. She simply cleaned it, her hands steady and deliberate. Showing responsibility without fear. In the kitchen, she guided him around the workspaces, pointing out where items belonged and explaining small routines in her simple words. She did not embellish, did not exaggerate, did not pretend to know more than she did. She spoke with honesty, a clarity that was rare in people who feared judgment. The man listened carefully, nodding at small points, sometimes pausing to observe her movements. The other staff were increasingly uneasy. They had spent years in the house, yet they seemed unsure how to act in his presence. Some tried to make themselves look busy, others attempted to speak with confidence, but their efforts often came off as awkward or forced. The maid, however, remained natural. She did not seek attention, did not try to impress, and did not second-guess herself. Her focus was on doing the right thing, on acting with integrity, and on showing kindness to the visitor in front of her. It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. The man paused in the hallway, looking at her intently. "You act differently from the others," he said quietly. "You do not act out of fear or expectation. You do not try to guess what I want to hear. You simply do what is right. That is rare. The maid felt a quiet warmth spread through her chest. She did not understand why these words had such an impact, but she knew they were sincere. She had always believed in honesty and kindness, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was unnoticed. Now, someone was acknowledging it in a way that felt meaningful, for the first time. The staff around her realized that their behavior had been driven by self-interest. They had been trying to guess what the man wanted, trying to appear competent or clever. The maid had done none of these things. She had acted naturally, guided by her own sense of responsibility and care. And that, the man seemed to recognize, was more valuable than any pretense. He continued walking. And the maid followed, making small adjustments where needed, answering questions politely and guiding him through the spaces she knew best. Her confidence was quiet but noticeable. She did not seek approval, yet her actions spoke volumes. It was clear that her dedication and integrity were not motivated by reward. They were simply part of who she was. At one point, the man stopped near a small window overlooking the garden. Sunlight streamed through, casting soft shadows on the floor. "It is not just the cleaning," he said. "It is the care in every movement, the attention to detail, the thought behind every choice. You have a gift for this. You treat the house as if it matters, and because of that, it does." The maid smiled softly, feeling a sense of pride and humility at the same time. She had never sought recognition for her work. She had never tried to impress anyone. But now, someone was seeing her efforts, not just the results, but the thought and care behind them. It was a rare, quiet satisfaction that filled her with warmth. The staff looked on in awe, realizing that her actions were setting her apart. They had been so focused on appearances and guessing what the man wanted, yet she had shown them all something they could not replicate. Her integrity, her calmness, and her kindness had created a powerful impression, one that no amount of nervous effort or forced charm could match. Time seemed to slow in the hallway as the man observed her. His eyes reflected a deep understanding, a recognition that went beyond mere words. And the maid, unaware of the full significance of this moment, continued to act naturally, guided by her values and her sense of responsibility. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. "I have seen many people in my life, but few act with such integrity when no one is watching. You have shown me what true care looks like. Not out of fear, not out of expectation, but because it is who you are." The maid nodded, her expression calm but reflective. She had spent her life working honestly and quietly, never seeking praise or recognition. And now, in this unexpected encounter, her efforts were being acknowledged in a way that felt real, meaningful, and lasting. The other staff could only watch in silence. They had underestimated the power of simple honesty and kindness. They had tried to impress, to anticipate, to perform, and yet it was the maid's natural, unassuming actions that left the strongest impression. It was a lesson that none of them would forget. The house, which had felt ordinary that morning, now felt alive. It was no longer just a building of polished floors and neat furniture. It was a reflection of care, integrity, and human kindness. And at the center of it all stood the maid, calm, confident, and quietly remarkable. The house was still, almost holding its breath, as the man and the maid paused in the hallway. The quiet confidence of the maid had left a strong impression, but neither she nor the staff had any idea of the true identity of this visitor. He had moved through the house calmly, observing everything, asking few questions, and yet his presence carried a sense of authority that no one could ignore. The staff whispered nervously to one another, trying to guess who he might be. Some suggested he was a distant relative, perhaps a family friend, or even a wealthy client of the household. Their guesses came with hushed tones and anxious glances. No one could imagine the truth, not even close. The maid, as always, remained composed. She had done nothing but fulfill her responsibilities, yet she felt a subtle tension in the air. She sensed that something important was about to be revealed, but she did not know what. She continued to stand calmly, ready to assist if needed, her hands folded lightly in front of her. The man walked slowly toward the center of the living room. pausing to look at the furniture and the decorations. His eyes were calm but carried a quiet intensity. Finally, he turned to the maid and spoke in a voice that was gentle yet firm. "I've been observing this house, and I have seen how you treat it," he said. His words were deliberate, each one measured and meaningful. "You have shown something that is very rare in people today." The maid tilted her head slightly, listening carefully, unsure of what he was about to say. "I do my best," she replied quietly, her voice steady. "I only do what I can to keep things in order." He looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "It is more than that," he said softly. "It is not just about keeping things in order. It is about how you behave when no one is watching, how you treat others with respect, and how you act with integrity. You do all this naturally, without expectation of praise or reward. That is why I have been watching you." The other staff gasped softly. They had been uneasy the entire time, unsure how to act or what to say, and now they realized that the maid's calm and honest behavior had caught the visitors' attention in a way they had never imagined. They began to exchange glances, feeling a mixture of awe and guilt. The man took a deep breath and then said something that made everyone in the room freeze. "I am the owner of this house." For a brief moment, silence filled the room. No one moved, no one spoke. The staff froze in shock, their mouths slightly open, their eyes wide with disbelief. The maid's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected he might be important, but she had never imagined he was the actual owner. The millionaire who lived far away and whose presence had only been a distant thought. For them, the staff began to murmur nervously. "He is the owner?" someone whispered. Another added, "We should have treated him differently." But the maid did not react with fear or surprise. She remained calm, steady, and composed as she had been throughout the morning. Her actions, after all, had not been driven by fear or expectation, the man continued, his gaze focused on her. "I came here today without announcing myself because I wanted to see how things truly are in my house when no one expects me to be here. I wanted to observe the staff honestly and see who acts with integrity." He paused and then looked around at the other staff. "Many people in this house tried to impress me or guess what I wanted to see. Some were anxious, some pretended, and some were unsure of what to do. But this one," he said, gesturing toward the maid, "acted with honesty, respect, and kindness. She treated everyone, including me, as she would treat anyone else, with care and dignity." The staff was stunned. They had never imagined that the simple, quiet actions of one person could be noticed by the owner himself. They began to feel a sense of shame for their own behavior, trying too hard to impress, worrying too much about appearances, and failing to act with the same natural integrity. The maid, however, simply listened, her expression calm and thoughtful. She did not seek attention, she did not boast, and she did not act differently than she always had. Her actions had been honest, true to her nature, and guided by a sense of responsibility and care. The man walked slowly around the room, observing the space once more. "It is rare to find someone who acts with such consistency, who treats their work and the people around them with respect and dignity," he said. "You have shown that the most important qualities are not in wealth, position, or appearance, but in the way a person behaves when no one is watching." The staff looked at the maid with newfound admiration. They realized that she had not done anything extraordinary in appearance, but the way she carried herself, her honesty, her humility, and her kindness had created an impact far greater than they could have imagined. The maid finally spoke softly, choosing her words carefully. "I only do what I believe is right. I do not expect recognition or reward. I only want to do my work properly and treat others with respect." The man nodded, a faint smile appearing on his face. "That is exactly why your actions matter. Integrity is more valuable than any wealth. Kindness is stronger than any title. And respect is more powerful than any authority." He turned to the staff again. "I hope you all understand something important today. The way you treat people, the way you act in small moments, the honesty and care you show in everyday work, these are the things that reveal your true character. Do not forget that." The staff looked at one another, silent, reflecting on the lesson they had just received. They felt humbled and inspired at the same time. They realized that the maid's simple, natural actions had set a standard far beyond anything they had considered. The man then returned his gaze to the maid. "You have earned my respect," he said quietly but firmly. "I have been observing your work, your behavior, and your attitude. You have shown me what it means to be trustworthy, responsible, and kind. And that is more valuable than anything else in this house or in my life." The maid felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never sought recognition for her efforts, and yet she was being acknowledged in the most meaningful way possible. It was not about wealth, power, or praise. It was about honesty, integrity, and the way she had chosen to act, even when no one was watching. The other staff watched quietly, inspired and humbled by the interaction. They understood that the maid's behavior had taught them something they would never forget. It was a lesson in honesty, respect, and human dignity, values that were far more important than any superficial effort to impress someone. The man walked slowly toward the door, pausing one last time. "Remember this," he said. "True character is revealed in the small moments. The way you act when no one is watching defines who you are. This maid has shown me that today, and I hope you all take this lesson to heart." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving a quiet, reflective atmosphere in the house. The staff remained still, absorbing what had just happened. The maid continued to stand calmly, aware of the significance of the moment, yet not letting it change her natural behavior. She had done what was right, and now it had been recognized. After a few minutes, the staff began to move again, speaking in hushed tones. They looked at the maid with admiration and newfound respect. They realized that her actions, her honesty, and her integrity had created a lasting impression on someone powerful, and more importantly, had set an example for all of them. The house, once ordinary and predictable, now felt different. It was no longer just a space with polished floors and neatly arranged furniture. It was a place where honesty, care, and integrity had been recognized, where small, thoughtful actions had created a profound impact. And at the center of it all stood the maid, calm, steady, and quietly remarkable. The day had started like any other, with routine and predictability. But in a few short hours it had become extraordinary. The unexpected visitor had revealed his true identity, acknowledged the maid's actions, and reminded everyone present of the importance of honesty and integrity. The staff would not forget this day, nor the lesson it carried. For the maid, the moment was life-changing. It was a validation not of wealth or status, but of the values she had lived by quietly, day after day. Her actions, simple and honest, had spoken louder than words, and they had been noticed by someone whose approval carried real weight. As the house settled back into its calm rhythm, the maid continued her work, her steps steady, her mind thoughtful. She had learned something important as well, that integrity and kindness mattered. Not because someone would notice, but because they defined who she was. And in that quiet understanding, she found a deeper sense of pride and fulfillment than any praise or reward could give. After the millionaire left the house that day, the atmosphere was different. The air seemed lighter and yet heavier with reflection. The staff moved more quietly than usual, each one lost in their own thoughts. Some were still processing the shock of discovering the visitor's identity. Others were replaying the events in their minds, realizing how differently they had acted compared to the maid. But she remained calm, carrying herself as she always had, steady, thoughtful, and focused on her work. Though her actions had been recognized by someone powerful, she did not let it change who she was. She knew that integrity was not about recognition or reward. It was about doing the right thing regardless of who was watching. Yet deep inside she felt a quiet satisfaction. There was a sense that her years of honest work and careful attention to detail had finally been seen, acknowledged in a way that truly mattered. The staff, on the other hand, could not help but reflect on their own behavior. They had been nervous, unsure, and often trying too hard to impress. They had forgotten that the most important things were honesty, kindness, and genuine care. Watching the maid act with calm confidence and integrity had been a lesson they could never forget. Slowly, a quiet respect began to grow among them for her. And for the values she represented, the house, too, seemed to hold a new energy. The polished floors, the neatly arranged furniture, and the fresh scent of cleanliness were the same as always, but there was something more now. It was as if the house itself had absorbed the recognition, the acknowledgement of the care that had been poured into it every day. It was no longer just a building. It was a reflection of the effort, honesty, and integrity that had been quietly sustained within its walls. Days passed after the visit, and the maid continued her work as usual. She dusted the shelves, polished the floors, and straightened every cushion with the same care as always. Nothing had changed about her routine, yet she moved with a new confidence. She had seen that her actions, however small and unnoticed they might seem, could have an impact far beyond what she imagined. That understanding filled her with a quiet pride, a sense of fulfillment that could not be shaken by circumstance. The staff began to act differently as well. They no longer worried so much about appearances or about guessing what someone wanted to see. Instead, they started focusing on the work itself, trying to do it honestly and with care. Slowly, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. There was a sense of collaboration, of mutual respect, and of understanding that integrity was more powerful than any superficial display of competence. The maid noticed these changes quietly, without seeking acknowledgement or praise. She felt a deep satisfaction knowing that her example had influenced those around her. People were beginning to understand that small, honest actions mattered more than trying to impress or appear important. The lesson she had demonstrated without knowing it was now visible to all. Weeks passed, and then one day a letter arrived at the house. It was from the millionaire himself. The maid was asked to receive it and deliver it to the head of the staff. She opened it carefully, her hand steady, and began to read aloud as the others gathered around. The letter was filled with appreciation and gratitude. It praised the maid for her honesty, integrity, and dedication. And it spoke about how rare it was to find someone who acted with such genuine care and respect. The staff listened intently, their eyes widening with each word. They realized that the recognition was not just a formality, but a true acknowledgement of the maid's character and actions. They felt inspired, humbled, and grateful to have witnessed such an example of authenticity in their midst. The maid herself listened quietly, feeling a mixture of humility and pride. She had never expected any of this, and yet it filled her with a quiet joy that could not be measured by words. The letter went further. It spoke of opportunities, of trust, and of a desire to support the maid in her life. While she had never worked for reward or recognition, the letter offered her a chance to improve her circumstances, to secure a future built on the very qualities she had demonstrated without thinking about personal gain. It was a reminder that integrity and kindness often lead to opportunities in ways one could never anticipate. The staff watched as the maid held the letter carefully. She did not boast or speak of it proudly. She simply acknowledged the gesture with quiet gratitude, understanding that her actions mattered not because of reward, but because of the truth they represented. Her humility, once again, became a lesson for everyone present. In the days that followed, small changes began to occur. The millionaire arranged for her work to be recognized formally. She was given more responsibilities, yes, but also more respect and support. People in the household began to treat her differently, not because they feared authority, but because they understood the value of honesty, diligence, and respect. The maid continued her work with the same dedication, but now it was coupled with a quiet empowerment. She knew that her actions had lasting effects, and that gave her confidence beyond what she had ever felt before. The impact was not limited to the household alone. The story of the maid's integrity spread quietly among the staff and their friends. People spoke of how one person's honest, respectful behavior could inspire an entire household, change the way others behaved, and even influence someone powerful. It became a story of hope, a reminder that true character is shown not through wealth, status, or pretense, but through the simple, consistent choices we make every day. The maid herself did not dwell on her newfound recognition. She continued to rise early, prepare the rooms, clean the floors, and care for the house as she always had. But she moved with a renewed sense of purpose. She had seen that her life, her work, and her choices could create ripples far beyond her imagination. And in that realization she found strength, contentment, and quiet pride. Her colleagues began to approach her differently as well. They sought advice, observed her methods, and sometimes asked her how she handled situations with such calm and integrity. She shared her wisdom without judgment, guiding others gently, showing them that care, respect, and honesty were not complicated. They were simply about being consistent in doing what was right. The house itself seemed to reflect the change. The air felt lighter, the atmosphere calmer, and there was a subtle warmth that seemed to fill every room. The daily routines continued, but now they were infused with a sense of purpose and understanding. The maid's example had created a culture of respect and diligence that went beyond mere instructions or duties. Months passed, and the impact of that extraordinary day remained. The maid had grown in confidence, not from pride or recognition, but from knowing that living with honesty and integrity truly mattered. The staff had learned to value sincerity over pretense. The house had become a place where care, respect, and diligence were appreciated for their true worth. One evening, as the maid finished her work and looked around the rooms she had cleaned and cared for, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She thought about the visitor, about the recognition, and about how a simple act of integrity had changed the way she was seen by others. She smiled quietly, not for a reward or praise, but for the knowledge that living honestly had made a real difference in the world around her. Life continued, as it always does, with its routines, challenges, and small victories. But for the maid, nothing would ever be quite the same again. She had been acknowledged, respected, and trusted in ways she had never imagined. Her life had shifted subtly but profoundly, not because she sought wealth, fame, or recognition, but because she chose to act with honesty, kindness, and integrity every day without expectation. Her story became a quiet inspiration, a testament to the power of small, meaningful actions. It was proof that doing the right thing, even when unseen, could leave a lasting impression on those around us, including people in positions of great influence. It reminded everyone that life is full of moments where choices matter, and that character is revealed not in grand gestures, but in the simple, consistent decisions we make. And so, the maid continued her life with calm determination. She rose early each day, cared for the house, treated others with respect, and performed her work with diligence and love. She had learned that integrity and kindness could open doors, create respect, and inspire change. But more importantly, she had learned that living honestly and treating others with care would always be its own reward, quietly shaping a life full of meaning, dignity, and purpose. The house remained as it had always been, beautiful, orderly, and calm, but now it also held a story of honesty, humility, and quiet courage. A story that would be remembered not for the wealth it housed, but for the integrity it reflected. And at the heart of that story was the maid, steady and remarkable, whose small, simple choices had transformed a moment into a lasting lesson for everyone who witnessed it. In the end, the extraordinary recognition of her character was not the conclusion, but the beginning of a life where her values, kindness, and integrity continued to shape her world and the world of those around her in ways that would be remembered far longer than any fleeting moment of wealth or status.